Hello, everyone. What we're going to do in this first lecture is discuss two basic things in biology. The first thing we'll discuss is what actually is life. So we're talking in biology, we focus on life, is the study of life. But what is life? How is life defined? And then in the second part, we will talk about how has life arisen on Earth. How has life started on Earth? For convenience, I have separated these two topics into two separate videos just to make it easier for you to watch them, but they're part of the same lecture. So, starting with the definition of life. What is life? What we're talking about here is how could you define something like this cute puppies, this tree, a bacterium as a living organism, whereas object like this rock or this virus here, they cannot be defined as a living organism. What makes them living and is non-living? It's a very key thing. So what I'll ask you right now is try to spend a few seconds thinking, how can you come out with a single definition that would explain all living organisms and make them different from non-living organisms? Well, I am pretty sure I could bet quite a bit of money that you cannot come out with a single definition. And in fact, there is no single definition, no single property that is just singly defining all living organism. And in fact, life is defined by multiple properties, not a single one. So, but again, to be alive, a living organism has to meet all of this definition. So it is a combination of this definition that would decide whether something is alive or not. What are these definitions, these properties of living organism? Well, first of all living organisms are actually made by cells. Think about bacteria, plants, humans, they're all made by cells. Again, viruses are not considered living organisms, and in fact, they're not made by cells. Second thing is all living organisms, they actually follow the same structural hierarchy. What do we mean by that? Well, think about it. How we are built. Ourselves, bacteria, again, plants, we're all made by the same elements that then join together forming molecules, which then form higher level molecules, which are biomolecules. By biomolecules, what I mean is nucleic acids, so DNA and RNA, proteins, carbohydrates, lipids. They are found in all living organisms. We all have the same biomolecules formed exactly following the same hierarchy. And then these biomolecules per se are not living organisms, but then joining together, they form a cell membrane and they form the cell, which is the starting unit for living organisms. Then, in some cases, some organisms, like ourselves, eukaryotes, they have also that this molecule form also some subcellular compartments, which are the organelles and so on. But all living organisms will follow the same hierarchy, which lead to the formation of the cell. Same structure for everyone. And then after that, these cells can actually join together in the same way in eukaryotes, forming population and so on, biosystem. So the hierarchy in all living organisms is always the same, with some slight differences between single cell and multicellular organisms. Second thing, think about any living organism, plant, bacteria, yourself, we all need energy. All living organisms, they need energy. That's your caloric intake per day, for example. And we need that because we need to sustain all the reactions that we do throughout our life, which are referred to as metabolism. We have to sustain it, so we need to get energy. Some organisms, the so-called producers, they get the energy directly from the sun, like plants we're talking about, for example, or even some bacteria, cyanobacteria, they take the energy from the sun. And then other organisms, like ourselves, instead cannot take the energy directly from the sun, but we take it from the producers. We are referred to as consumers. We take the energy from the food that we intake. So other living organisms provide that energy to ourselves. But we all need to get energy to sustain our metabolism. Other property, we are all able, whether you're a bacterium or a human being, to sense the environment or the inner or external environment and respond to it. So we are able to sense and respond to stimuli in general. For example, put your hand on your stove. I'm just joking. Don't do that at home. But put it there, you'll feel this very high heat, right? So you're able to sense the external environment in the form of heat, extreme heat in this case. And then your response will be to actually pull away that hand. You respond to it. And that's obviously to preserve ourselves that we have this property. Same thing, we are able inside our body to sense to different level of glucose, right? And respond by producing insulin or glucagon, depending whether the sugar goes too high or low, glucose goes too high or low. And by doing that, we perform another thing that all living organisms do, which is called homeostasis. This is an example of homeostasis. By homeostasis in general, what we mean is the capacity of keeping some parameters stable. This could be your body temperature, could be the pH in your blood, for example, could be your glucose level, the glycemia in your blood. It could be different things. And or for a bacterium, for example, is able to sense where glucose is, concentration gradient of glucose outside. And by doing that, we'll go in that direction. We'll respond to that in order to keep energy levels stable, right? Another example of homeostasis. We are all able to perform homeostasis. Finally, all living organisms that have genetic material, always in the form of DNA, again, viruses, including retroviruses like COVID-19, that are made of RNA, they do contain the genetic material in the form of RNA, are not living organisms. So, but all living organisms will have their genetic material in the form of DNA. And this is used by all living organisms to do the same thing, to grow, to sustain itself and grow, like for a cell to sustain itself, form new mitochondria and so on, new organelles, to also replicate, for each cells to produce two cells that have to be able to transfer that genetic material from one cell to the other one. And they use the DNA. And also to evolve. DNA is the base of evolution. These small changes, referred to as mutations in the DNA, are what allow for the generation of new generations, excuse me the words, which then might adapt better to the changes in the environment and therefore allow for the species to evolve over time. So all living organisms, or something can be defined as a living organism if it meets all these properties, which can schematically be clustered, if you want, in four main things here. So they all have hierarchy, which ultimately leads to the basic unit of life, which is the cell. And the cells also follow a similar hierarchy when it comes to forming organ, tissues, population, and so on. All living organisms, they need energy. They need energy to survive, to sustain their metabolism, and this creates actually interdependence between producers and consumers, as we mentioned before. All living organisms are able to keep some parameters stable, and they do that by sensing the changes in the parameter in their environment and respond to that. And finally, they all have genetic material which allow them to grow, reproduce, and mutate, and therefore evolve as well over time. Why are viruses not considered alive? Because first of all, they don't have their own metabolism. And these apply to different things. So they don't have their own metabolism, independent. They rely on host cells. COVID-19 has to get through your mucosa, through your lungs too, in your cell in your lungs to replicate, right? And that's basically all they do. They infect and replicate to produce new proteins, part of the capsid, membrane, and so on. They have to infect. But if you put it on a cell surface, they can't do that. And that's a big topic nowadays. How long does a virus last on metal and so on? Why do we ask that? Because it cannot replicate, right? So if it could replicate, it would last forever in any surface. But now, no, cannot replicate, and somehow some surface preserve the virus better or not, but they don't allow the virus to replicate. So viruses, they do not have their own metabolism, and therefore they are unable to duplicate their genetic material, whether it's DNA and RNA. And for this reason, they're dependently on other cells cells, sorry, to reproduce, and therefore they don't meet all the characteristic of lives that we have listed so far. I'm going to stop here now, and then we'll resume with the second video where we'll talk about how life has evolved over time.